In his novel Act of God, atheist Charles Templeton wrote, "The Christian church bases its claims mostly on the teachings of an obscure young Jew with messianic pretensions who, let's face it, didn't make much of an impression in his lifetime. There isn't a single word about him in secular history, not a word, no mention of him by the Romans, not so much as a reference by Josephus." Well, I'll give this to Templeton. At least he believed there was a Jesus. Some don't even believe that. But there was indeed a man called Jesus. A man who turned this world upside down and continues to do so today. For those who deny his impact upon this world or who deny his very existence, we say this: you are being deceived by Satan. He is the author of all lies. Jesus said of those who rejected him as the Messiah and yet believed themselves to be the chosen children of God, "You belong to your father, the devil, and there is no truth in him, for he is a liar and the father of lies." The truth is, even if one doesn't take into account the Scriptures, for which there is more historical evidence than for any other book in history, there is ample historical evidence to substantiate that there was, without a doubt, a man called Jesus. A man who, we might add, claimed to be the very Son of God, and who claimed that faith in him was the only way to heaven. Now, whether one believes that or not, this much is historically undeniable. There was a man called Jesus. For proof, we begin with the very historian who Templeton said didn't so much as make a single reference to Jesus, the first-century Jewish priest and historian, Josephus. He was born in AD 37, just 4 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. He lived at the same time as the apostles. His most famous work was the Antiquities, completed in about 93 AD, while the Apostle John was still alive. He wrote, "About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who wrought surprising feats, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. When Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing amongst us, had condemned him to be crucified, those who had in the first place come to love him did not give up their affection for him. On the third day he appeared to them restored to life, for the prophets of God had prophesied these and countless other marvelous things about him. And the tribe of Christians so called after him has to this day not disappeared." Now, there is remarkable consensus among both Jewish and Christian scholars that this passage as a whole is authentic. It's equally obvious that there have been interpolations or expressions added by Christian copyists that in no way express the beliefs of Josephus. And yet, overall, Josephus' writings, backed by archaeological discoveries, have proven to be extremely accurate, as evidenced by his accounts of the Jewish wars. Remove the interpolations, and we have historical collaboration that there was a man called Jesus. He was a martyred leader who did surprising feats and who was considered a wise teacher. He established a wide and lasting following and was crucified under Pilate at the instigation of some of the Jewish leaders. But Josephus was not alone. There are others who attested to the historical truth that there was a man called Jesus. Gaius Cornelius Tacitus, best known today simply as Tacitus, was one. He was a senator and historian of the Roman Empire. He lived between the years AD 56 and AD 117. In AD 115, Tacitus explicitly states that Nero persecuted the Christians who were, in his words, followers of Christus, that is, the Christ. He wrote, "Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hatred for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition broke out, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty, and then upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. Obviously, the very historical fact that Christians were dying for their faith in a man called the Christ substantiates that there was indeed a man called Jesus. Enter Pliny the Younger. He was the governor of Bithynia in northwestern Turkey, who died in 79 AD in the eruption of Vesuvius. Much of his correspondence with his friend Emperor Trajan has been preserved. Like Josephus and Tacitus, he too historically substantiates that there was a man called Jesus. Referring to Christians who believed in him in about 111 AD, Pliny wrote this to Trajan. I have asked them if they are Christians, and if they admit it, I repeat the question a second and a third time with a warning of the punishment awaiting them. If they persist, I order them to be led away for execution. For whatever the nature of their admission, I am convinced that their stubbornness and unshakable obstinacy ought not to go unpunished. They also declared that the sum total of their guilt or error amounted to no more than this. They had met regularly before dawn on a fixed day to chant verses alternately amongst themselves in honor of Christ as if to a god, and also to bind themselves by oath, not for criminal purpose, but to abstain from theft, robbery, and adultery. This made me decide it was all the more necessary to extract the truth by torture from two slave women, whom they called deaconesses. I found nothing but a degenerate sort of cult carried to extravagant lengths. End quote. These words penned by Pliny confirm that in the first century was indeed a man called Jesus. He was worshipped as God by his followers, followers who not only maintained high ethical standards, followers who were willing to die for their faith in a man called Jesus.